All in Sports Network. We love sports.
It is Tuesday, March 4th, and this is a brand new week of your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns right here on All In Horns. I'm Tanner Carlson. That is Jake Jimerson. This is brought to you by Rogue Sports Network, and what a weekend we had in Texas sports. A lot of good, way more good than bad, but there was some bad, and we are going to get into that in today's episode. Jake, today's episode is going to primarily be all about Texas basketball, men's side, women's side primarily. But then we're also going to go more on the national spectrum of things, kind of like what we did with the NFL season. And we're going to kind of start breaking down of what conference tournaments are going to look like and who's in what spots and how many conferences have how many teams in March Madness currently and what the bracketology in March Madness looks like. And so today's episode, for all the March Madness fans, for all the college basketball fans out there, this is the episode for you to kickstart our week on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon. Jake, how was the weekend?
It was great because it finally was not freezing. I was finally able to I was finally able to go outside. There was sunlight, first time seeing sunlight, and
I can tell by your pale skin blending in with your headphones.
Yeah, no, it becomes very apparent since I've moved to Kansas City of when we're in winter and when we're not. Because typically I'm out playing golf and doing things when the weather's nice, and so I get a tan going, and then I just become pale as a ghost because I'm just in my basement, in my man cave, playing the PlayStation, playing on the computer, and just doing my nerdy stuff in my basement, never going outside. So it's nice to get some sunlight.
Speaking of golf and speaking of PlayStation, Jake and I have purchased PGA 2K25. We've been playing it with one another online. So if anybody out there listening has a copy, shoot us an invite, and we'll play a little match play against you and a buddy, or we'll play a threesome or whatever that looks like. I don't know. I feel like the rules are kind of limitless in this game of things you can do. So we're all for it. Just let us know.
There's just one rule for you that you haven't been able to figure out so far, and that's winning. You do a lot of losing to me so far.
Hey, we've only played 2 full rounds, so yeah, I'll get there. And I put in some work over the weekend, Jake. So I think I'm gonna surprise you next time we get on the sticks. But anyway, a great weekend for college basketball. Your Texas women's Longhorn basketball team are I'm just going to say SEC champions. I'm not going to say co-SEC champions. I'm going to say they are SEC champions in their first inaugural year in the conference. South Carolina. So they did win a coin flip to get the first seed in the SEC tournament. But women are still SEC champions. 14th regular season title. Obviously the first SEC title because it's their first year in the SEC. Last won it in 2023 in the Big 12. And this weekend to wrap up the regular season, Jake, they dominated Florida 72-46.
Yeah, not only capping off and securing that share of the title, but dominating in that last game was nice to see, just because Mississippi State was a bit of a struggle. Mississippi State's one of those teams that seems to be good at doing that. And obviously, that's where Vic Schaefer was. And so they showed up and they played well, but it was nice to see them go ahead and get a dominating win again. It feels like this women's team, not only, granted, they have not lost much, but when they have lost, they've responded well to it. Obviously, splitting with South Carolina after losing the first one pretty badly, winning that game the second time, not losing any other SEC games than that. But when they have a close game, it feels like they almost always blow out a team in the next game, regardless of how good they are. And it's almost like to them a close win, it feels like a bit of a loss. And then they rebound and they just dominate. And I wish that the women's team could get the men's team. Yeah. I feel like I wish the women's team could get the men's team like a pep talk or something, because they're just two teams with different levels of success, but just different DNA. Whereas the mentality is just completely different. The women's team is just a bunch of dogs who get after it and get after on both ends of the court. whereas we have not seen that on the other side.
Yeah, Oldacre led the team in scoring with 18. Texas was actually out rebounded, but I have a theory on why they were out rebounded 40-33 in this game. They did have 21 assists to Florida's 7, so definitely outplayed them in every aspect offensively. Texas forced 23 turnovers, Jake. When you force 23 turnovers, you know what the other team's not doing? Shooting the ball. You know what you can't get if your opponent's not shooting the ball? Rebounds. So yeah, that probably the turnover number probably skewed the rebounding numbers to favor Florida a little bit, and which is why Texas wasn't on the glass as often, because they were turning the ball over, or Florida was turning the ball over to them, and Texas was turning that into offense. And so, like I said, just a great game all around. I've really liked what I've seen out of the depth of this Longhorn team too, Jake. Everyone wants to talk about Rory Harmon and your Madison Bookers of the team, and but you've got some depth on this roster too, especially at the big position, where we know that is vital in having success, especially in the women's game.
Yeah, and your math is mathin'. Texas shot 6 more shots than Florida, and really Texas didn't get that many offensive rebounds. That Florida did have more offensive rebounds, so not the best game on the boards for them, but it doesn't matter whenever you're getting after it on defense and you're forcing steals. I mean, 23 turnovers for Florida to 11 of Texas. That speaks for itself.
That's dominating. Yeah.
Granted, Florida is not a good team. I mean, I don't want to talk it up too much, but with an SEC title on the line, Texas came out, they put them away early. They stayed true to their DNA of how they play. Shot 9 threes, only made 1, but we talked about it. That 9 is about the highest number you want to see him at. You really want to see him below 10.
I agree, Jake. But to finish the regular season off as the number 1 team in the country, a share of the SEC regular season title against a South Carolina team who I believe has like 10 McDonald's All-Americans on that team, is nothing to scoff at. It's definitely a huge accomplishment in year 1 in the new conference. And going into SEC tournament play, I would expect that this Texas team is going to make a push to win the tournament. It'll probably be between them and South Carolina, I would imagine. And then going into March Madness, man, they're going to be a number 1 overall seed going into the tournament. And, they have, the women's side has home games to start the March Madness tournament, correct? The first 2 games are home games.
Yeah, the first 2 will be home games, and so the Moody should be rocking. For those games.
That should start marking your calendar. Start making plans now. That after the SEC tournament, start filling in those seats and buying those tickets up and reserving those weekends to go support the girls, because if there's any basketball program for the University of Texas right now, it's the women's team that deserves the most support.
Yeah, the Moody should be much louder, much more lively for the women's first round games rather than the men's NIT games, if they even host an NIT game at this point.
Speaking of, let's just go ahead, segue to it, Jake. Let's rip the Band-Aid off. And I don't think we have a ton to say about the men's game. I think the thing that I want to say is just how this season has ended for the men's team. What is it? Losing? I've got the number here.
6 of the last 7, I think.
6 of the last 7. Yeah, losing the last 6 of their last 7 games. This team has quit. This team is not playing for Rodney Terry. Rodney Terry knows he's on his way out. The players aren't playing for their coach. The locker room is completely destroyed. The program is at an all-time low in terms of morale, aura, vibes. It's a bad feel in Austin right now for the basketball program, and it's showing on the court as well. They were beat by a bad Georgia team, 83-67. But Jake, if you go look at the stat sheet, look at every major statistical category, Texas was beat in just about every single category there was. I mean, completely dominated on the scoreboard, in the stat sheet, on the court, everywhere and anywhere. Georgia just straight up beat Texas head to head in about every single matchup. And I think Trey Johnson had 8 shots in the game, 7 shots, something like that.
Something like that. I turned this off at halftime.
Yeah.
At 12 minutes, it was a 2-point ball game. to go in the first half. At halftime, it was just about a 20-point game. This team has, and I don't like to say this a lot of the times, but I don't know what else to call it other than giving up. Whenever you lose three, you go on that good stretch in the middle, right? Where your only loss there for a handful of games was to a really good Florida team on the road. You live with that. And then a really close loss at Ole Miss. And then you dominate LSU on the road. Biggest blowout win of the year. As far as just, I think that was, other than like a Chicago State or Mississippi Valley State, but against a
conference
against a bigger conference team, the biggest point differential. Granted, LSU's not good, but still, neither is South Carolina. And so then you're feeling a little bit better, right? Then you lose to Arkansas at home. Okay, not good. Lose to Vanderbilt on the road. Okay, really not good. Split one against Alabama, Kentucky. Hit that home stretch of games we've been talking about. And you get blown out by Alabama, never competitive. Beat a Kentucky team at home, yes, who was also missing their top guards. I think they were missing
three top guards.
I think they were missing 3 of their top guards. And then get embarrassed at South Carolina.
And that's when the season basically took a nosedive for the lowest point in the year.
Honestly, I don't care that the Arkansas game was overtime. That was embarrassing.
Texas shouldn't have Arkansas shouldn't have let Texas back in the game to take it to overtime, if we're being honest with ourselves.
Well, and when you have a freshman go 50% from the field for 39 points and you can't win, that's embarrassing.
Yeah.
In my opinion. And you got swept by a not great Arkansas team. And then you get just flat out embarrassed at home by a bad Georgia team. Yeah, I tried being optimistic for portions of the season just because their play did suggest they were going to make the tournament. Yeah. Whether or not they would win a game in the tournament, was certainly up for grabs, but you had to feel like after that stretch in the middle season, like, well, they're still not a great team, but they're playing better. If they continue to improve, they're going to make the tournament. And they've just, I think the Arkansas game was the final nail in the coffin of the team just giving up. I don't know how else to feel about it when you get embarrassed like that at home to a Georgia team.
It's South Carolina and Georgia. It's the combination of the two. And then you throw in getting swept by Arkansas, and you throw in a couple of these other games, and you're like, yeah, this is just not a good basketball team who's completely given up. You've got
should not be in the tournament.
What's that?
Shouldn't be in the tournament.
No,
to be clear, because there's still people putting them in.
Yeah,
which is crazy.
Yeah, and by the way, Lenardi, whoever does bracketology for ESPN, he hasn't updated it since like February 20 something. So like this weekend's games aren't even in his bracketology quite yet. So it's kind of hard to get a good read on it. But anyway, no, this Texas team is not a good enough team to play in March Madness. And there are other teams like a Drake. There are other teams from smaller conferences that deserve, like the Big East. I would rather a Nova or a Xavier get in over a Texas without question. It's just going to be better basketball come March. So get Big East teams in there, get some Valley teams in there, and just
a North Texas.
Texas.
You have Memphis, who's probably going to make it out of the AAC. North Texas is 21-6, 12-3 in conference play. They should be in. I mean,
they're not even one of the last 4 teams in or out currently. They're not even in a bubble watch team right now.
Texas has they would just be getting in based off the conference they're in.
Yeah.
They don't have many quality wins. Their best quality win is an A&M team that is completely imploding. And kind of showing that they weren't as good as a lot of people thought.
Yeah, well, they've lost 4 straight, so that loss or that win for Texas is looking worse and worse by the game.
They're going to be just about 500 in conference here shortly.
Yeah.
I mean,
they have Bama and Florida left on their schedule. A&M does. I don't see them winning either one of those games.
Yeah, it's not surprising that Texas was able to win that game and that be their best win, because A&M isn't that. isn't as good of a team as the top SEC teams. And it's not even close
No.
because they're not really prolific on offense. They just get after it on the boards and play okay defense.
As this season has kind of wrapped up, actually, let me get to that question here in a little bit. Jake, let's finish our actual Longhorn talk. We'll talk about conferences and the whole big picture of March Madness here just shortly. So I'm going to try to remember that thought about A&M whenever we, or at least the SEC conference when we get into those talks. But Jake, I think that this is going to be a new coach, a new coaching staff. And then you look at this roster, and I'm going to name the players on this roster who I don't think will be returning next season, whether that be via the transfer portal, the NBA draft, which there's only one draftable player on this entire roster. We know who that is. Or is a senior who is going to be graduating or is running out of eligibility. So here's the list of players, Jake. Trey Johnson, draft. Kaluma, senior. Jason Kent, senior. Julian Larry, senior. Tremont Mark, senior. Onyema, senior. Jordan Pope Jr., don't know if he'll return. He may return, may not return. And Shedrick Weaver, Shedrick, and then who's a senior, and then Kendall Weaver, who is a junior. I don't know if Weaver returns, and I don't know if Pope returns, being juniors. I could see them easily hitting the transfer portal with this coaching staff completely moving somewhere else. That is essentially all your rotation guys who played this year.
Yeah, I mean, Weaver maybe could return. He's been at Texas his whole career and may just want to stay a Longhorn.
Perfect opportunity for him.
He did transfer in after his freshman season, but that was from UTA, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, but it's just a perfect opportunity for him now with the coaching change, him going into his final year of eligibility, coming off of an injury, fresh start. He can make a fit somewhere else easily.
Yeah, because I do feel like at this point, I've talked about how I thought Chris Del Conte probably didn't want to fire Terry this year. I feel like Terry has forced it at this point.
100%. Yeah.
I mean, unless he just goes on a run in the SEC tournament and wins the SEC tournament,
no,
I
don't know if there's you would have to win the SEC tournament, get your automatic bid into the March Madness tournament, and win a game or two in March Madness.
If they made the tournament, he wouldn't get fired this season. He would leave him one more year before paying that buyout. And when he already thinks, at least per reports of people that are in the know, that he thinks next year would be a stronger coaching pool. If they made, I said it in the middle of the season, if they made the tournament, he wouldn't get fired. I still think that. I just don't think there's a way they make the tournament.
Yeah. Jake, do you think that this is basketball? I'm not naive to the fact that basketball can be a 1-2 year turnaround window where you're at the bottom of your conference. 1 or 2 years go by, you get the right coaching staff, you get the right roster in place, you get the right system in place. You can turn it around and be a top of your conference in 1 or 2 seasons. I'm not naive to that fact. What do you think the turnaround is for this program? Listing the players I just listed that are possibly leaving, and then with assumably an entire new coaching staff.
Well, I mean, if you get the right staff 1 year, Missouri was winless in the SEC last year. Winless. They didn't win a single game. The whole SEC schedule. They're a top 15 team in the country this year. I mean, if Missouri can turn it around in 1 year like that, Texas can. Texas is not a winless team in the SEC. Yeah. I mean, granted, you're going to have a massive turnover in talent for sure. But if you get the right staff in, with the transfer portal the way it is, you can have a team that makes the tournament next year. It depends what you mean by a turnaround. I mean, Sweet 16.
I'm talking to get Texas to a point to where we want them in a perennial contending for March Madness year in, year out, maybe winning a game, maybe getting to the Sweet 16 on a more regular basis than not.
Yeah, I mean, I think they should be a tournament team every season. I think that is the bottom of the barrel standard for Texas basketball, is making the tournament. And then, really winning a game is then like, okay, this is a decent season. And then Sweet 16 is a successful season. I would love for that standard to grow to more. I would have loved the elite, an Elite Eight to become a regular, but you're kidding yourself if you think that is a standard of Texas basketball, because it never has been
But
on a
now it's very
consistent
similar.
basis.
What we want to get to that point is what Vic Schaefer, coach of the year for women's basketball, by the way, just announced last night, tonight while we're recording this. But Vic Schaefer's job whenever he got to Texas was get this team competing for conference titles, get this team getting to the tournament on a regular basis, and then year after year after year got further and deeper runs, got to the Elite Eight, got to the Sweet 16, got, and has continually gotten them to that point. And now they look like they're a national champion favorite going into the tournament this year. That's where I want Texas. Maybe just, hey, let's just get to the tournament year after year after year. Let's be consistent and then be atop our conference, compete for conference titles, get high seeds, and that gives you the best opportunity to make a deep run occasionally into the tournament, whether that be at Elite Eight, Final Four, what have you. National champions will come. That's fine. But you have to get to that point to actually compete for a national championship if that's what you want. You have to start making runs to the Elite Eight like a Michigan State does every couple of years, just a random year. Yep, Michigan State's good. Oh, like a UConn, like a North Carolina. These teams continually, now, yes, I know those are the blue bloods of college basketball, but there's no reason, in my opinion, that if Texas can get to that point that you and I are talking about, at least getting to the tournament year in and year out, who's to say not 1 or 2 years out of those years they make a deep run to the Elite Eight or Final Four?
Well, that was the Rick Barnes career. They were a tournament team every year. They made Elite Eights every now and then, and they made the one Final Four run.
Yeah.
The peak of Rick Barnes could have been a little bit higher with maybe another Final Four run.
The wasted Durant year was tough.
Yeah, that's the toughest year in his career, without a doubt, just because the tournament game was such a flop. Granted, Durant did not play good in that game.
True.
It's not really all on Rick Barnes whenever your entire team is bricking and OJ Mayo and Taj Gibson are going
hitting everything.
Yeah, but I think that's a reasonable want for Texas basketball to as far as how the growth of the program would ideally go. But right now,
I
think that's where it was heading with Chris Beard. Unfortunately,
I do too.
You felt the growth, you felt the excitement, the fan excitement, and then now a couple of years later, it's rock bottom. And there's worse years in Texas basketball. I mean, they lost to Chaminade in 2012.
Yeah, but this year feels
worse because there was expectation.
Yeah.
Not crazy expectation, but hey, this could be a Sweet 16 team.
Yeah.
Type expectation there's this really talented freshman we're excited to see, and he's lived up to the hype and then some. He's going to be the SEC Freshman Player of the Year. He's leading the SEC in scoring, and you're not even going to make the NCAA tournament. That just feels terrible. And
that's a fireable offense in my opinion. So
I think Chris Del Conte will agree with you on that.
Yeah. Jake, let's go ahead and around the league real quickly, kind of give a recap of the weekend's games. Auburn annihilates Kentucky. They've proven that they're the number 1 team in the country for a reason. They beat Kentucky 94-78. Duke, the number 2 team in the country, they put up 100 on FSU. A&M, we hinted at this earlier, A&M dropping their 4th straight, losing to a very good Florida team, 89-70, a nearly 20-point loss, however. And then the Tennessee-Bama, this is March, baby. March has begun officially. Tennessee beats Bama at the buzzer. Jake, I had a quick question for you while we're on this game. What was Nate Oates doing at the end of that game?
Maybe something was in the Gatorade on the sideline, and he even admitted it after the game.
He did. Yeah,
he said, I appreciate a coach. He made mistakes and he admitted it. It's one thing to make the mistakes. It's another not to own up to them. But was
no timeout on the 5-second call.
It was really puzzling from a coach who is a very good basketball coach, without a doubt. I mean, it's not like, well, he hasn't made it. No, they went to the Final Four. Like he's made the runs. He's been consistently good. He's Alabama in a basketball in a spot I can't remember ever seeing it.
Is Alabama a basketball school? People are asking.
People are asking if they are a basketball school now. That is a question. But I mean, it just goes to show that even your top coaches make really stupid
Yeah.
mistakes sometimes.
Jake, Bama's dropped 3 of their last 5, and they've got Florida and Auburn to finish the season off. Do you think that they've got a little bit of a hiccup, a little bit of a speed bump before the tournament comes in? Or, what you and I, we're two people that actually really like this Bama team. They're very good. We know the firepower. They've not been playing their best basketball into February, going into March. Is this going to have an effect on them in the tournament?
I don't think so, because their scoring is so prolific that if they just get hot for the tournament, they could win it all. But they could also lose in the first round if their scoring is terrible and their defense isn't good.
Yeah.
They're just going to be one of those teams this year that some people are going to predict them to win the national title. Some people are going to predict them to lose within the first 2 rounds.
Do you trust them?
Well,
that's hard.
What
it's
is
a hard
trust?
question.
I mean, do I think they'll make the Sweet 16? I think there's a better chance than not. Because when you have that type of scoring, that typically translates to the NCAA tournament, especially the depth of scoring they have. Also, we're talking about a hiccup of where they have played 5 straight ranked games.
Yeah.
And lost a very competitive game against Auburn at home. That game ended up being 9 points. It was closer than that.
It was a game of the year, in my opinion.
And you have a loss to Missouri on the road. That's probably their worst loss in the stretch. You handled Kentucky by 13. You absolutely demolished Mississippi State 113-73. And then you lost a 3-point game on the road to the number 5 team in the country. I mean, what is that really a speed bump? I mean, if you're only going to lose to a team the caliber of
you've got
Auburn,
Florida and Auburn to turn around and finish.
Do they lose
off.
to Missouri on a neutral site? I don't know. It possibly, but I think they would have a better chance of winning that. Missouri's a really good home team. And Tennessee on the road by 3. So if they are going to only lose to teams of that talent, still be able to blow out of Mississippi State, blow out of Kentucky, that's still a Sweet 16 type team. So do I trust them to, will I have them in my national title? I mean, I don't know the bracket yet, but more than likely not.
It does depend on their path. It does.
But will I have them in the Sweet 16? Almost surely. I would be shocked if I don't.
Jake, last game I wanted to talk about real quickly, then we'll get into the conferences and kind of what March Madness currently looks like bracketology wise, who's on the bubble, how many conferences has how many teams in it to fill out the bracket, and we'll kind of get a decent idea. But Jake, Rick Pitino, white suit and the whiteout at the Garden, a great look, avoided a major upset, I think it was a 2-conference win Seton Hall team who's sitting at the bottom of that conference right now. They escaped with I think it was a 10-point win, but it was much closer. I think they were losing at one point in that game. But St. John's does take care of business in the Garden, in the whiteout, and Pitino with the white suit looking fresh as always. He looks sharp out there.
I don't know if they're good enough to make the Final Four or more, but I want it. I want it. I don't know why I like Pitino. I know there's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't. Not to not like him, but why you shouldn't like him by all reasonable standards of humanity. But I don't care. I kind of like Pitino. Maybe it's because he's gone on this podcast that's on my hat and done interviews that made him likable as a basketball coach. He's just objectively a great basketball coach.
Yeah. Everywhere he's gone, he's
much better basketball coach in person.
Yes, much better basketball coach in person. I can agree with that. I think everybody can agree with that statement.
I really want this St. John's team. I mean, it's cool. You have Madison Square Garden sold out and buzzing for all their games. Something that I don't think anyone would have thought was possible 5 years ago. And they're going to be a top 2 seed in the tournament. I mean, they're going to be more than likely a 2 seed. They win their tournament, their conference tournament. They could be a 1 seed. But
maybe
they're fun. I mean, they're number 7 right now.
Yeah.
You win your conference tournament. That's probably another win over UConn, which would be a 3rd. And then a win over, that would be they close the season with Marquette at Marquette.
Big
That'd be a
game.
top 20 win.
Yep.
And then
Big
you're
game.
probably going to get another couple ranked wins in the tournament. If they win out from this point, they have a very good case for a 1 seed.
Yeah.
At a, they're 26-4 right now. They'd be 31-4 roughly. In the Big East Conference, that always gets underrated going in the tournament. Everyone goes, it's a down year. And then they do really well in the tournament.
The stupid thing is it's not a down year. I don't think it's ever a down year in the Big East. It's a very competitive conference. And I think that for whatever reason that they get counted out against because they don't bring in maybe as much money as a good Florida team or a good Auburn team or a good, Michigan State team or what have you. But man, I've always liked the Big East. And I think that's like the pedigree. The Big East is college basketball. Some of the best games in college basketball history has come out of the Big East historically. And even more recently with UConn winning back-to-back national champions. Jake, let's take a look at the overall bracketology for March Madness, and we'll wrap this show up. Conference bids as of now. I only put this team in here because the 2 teams that are in it are very fun teams who have made runs into the Final Four in recent memory, but the Atlantic 10 currently has 2 teams sitting in the tournament. That would be George Mason and VCU. Anyone who's a March Madness fan knows what those 2 teams and what those 2 programs have done come tournament time. They're fun to watch, and you kind of always have that like, that's an upset team. That's a Cinderella team. VCU, George Mason, Final Four appearances between those 2 programs. And so I have those in just to kind of, no one else in that conference is making it out. And it's going to be George Mason and VCU that come out of that conference.
Yeah, George Mason, the first Cinderella, that like big Cinderella run that I remember from watching March Madness. And not talking just winning 1 game, but just going on an actual run.
Jake, when was what seed were they? Do you remember? Were they a 12?
12 or 13?
12 or 13.
You talk and I'll find it.
Yeah. ACC, Jake, really down year in the ACC. They've got the number 2 team in the country, Duke, and that might be just about it. Louisville and Clemson do have their tickets essentially punched to the big dance. Bubble watch teams, North Carolina, don't think that they should make it. Don't think they're a tournament team. I don't want to see them in the tournament, quite frankly. That's not because I'm a Duke or North Carolina fan. I just don't like North Carolina when they're bad. They shouldn't be in because they're always good. SMU on the bubble and also Wake Forest on the bubble. Those 2 teams, whether it's SMU or Wake Forest, is going to need a good tournament, SEC tournament, to make their bid a little bit more of a case to get into the tournament. But the ACC, 3 teams, Jake, out of the ACC.
Yeah, it is actually a down year for the ACC. Real quick, George Mason was only an 11 seed, which I feel like they're lower. But here was the thing. Here was their run. And this was why it was so special. Michigan State, North Carolina, Wichita State, Connecticut.
Yeah.
That was who they beat.
3 blue bloods.
Yeah, 3 blue bloods. And I would say, like, if you had blue bloods of the G5, Wichita State's like Wichita a G5 State. Blue blood type team.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's about as impressive of a list of names on your death list or whatever you want to call it.
Who'd they end up losing to? Do you have that up?
I think it was Florida. Of course, the article only.
Oh, that makes sense. Was that during Florida's back-to-back national championship season?
I believe so.
That would make sense with Billy Donovan being there.
Yeah, but of course, the article I was on doesn't say, but I do believe they ended up losing to Florida. But yeah, that list of names they beat is about as impressive as you can have to run to the Final Four. But ACC, yeah. This is what happens when North Carolina and they just extended their coach, I believe. Unless I got fake articles.
No, I think they did because they just won a national championship 3 years ago before UConn had their back-to-back.
Wasn't that like his first year though?
His first year there with Roy Williams' squad, kind of, and he ended up winning a national championship in year 1.
And I mean, they're 4th in the ACC right now, and they kind of lost every good team they played. They got beat by about every SEC team that they played against in the non-conference, lost to KU in the non-conference. And they're sitting
not a great KU team.
A terrible KU team. Honestly, should they really be in the tournament, KU
So,
team?
Jake, here's my argument here, Jake, and you and I, we've talked about it. If you have a program, Kansas, North Carolina, Duke, I'll throw UConn in there, UCLA. If you have prestigious, historically known basketball programs fighting and scratching for a 9 seed or an 8 seed, they shouldn't be in. End of discussion, period. They're not like other programs. Those teams suck. Unfortunately, we've seen North Carolina, UConn win it as an 8 seed, or Michigan State make a deep run as an 8 or 9 seed, which goes completely against my point as to why they shouldn't be in the tournament. But I think if you've got a blue blood program like those teams struggling in the regular season, if they're not going to be anything of I would say a 6 seed or higher, they shouldn't make the tournament, period. That's just that's my viewpoint on it.
North Carolina this year, I think, is a good example of that. Of do they really belong in the tournament? And I would say no. KU probably does, just because they do have some really good non-conference wins, and they still have some solid wins in conference as well. They beat Iowa State.
Kansas
they
is currently in. I
Duke.
think they're like a 6 or 7 seed right now. Kansas is. There's something.
Yeah,
like
I think a 7 seed is. I just hate putting like a Kansas at an 8 or 9.
It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right.
Well, no, if you're a 1 seed, you're pissed off. You're like, why in the hell are we playing KU round 2?
Second round. Yeah.
Because they have talent.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's one thing. These teams always have talent. If they just get hot, it's the worst way to go out. But yeah, I mean, I've always agreed with you on that argument. There's always seems to be. Last year, St. John's, completely ripped off out of not being in the tournament.
Yeah.
And you had teams in the tournament who had 19 wins. And you have a St. John's team who has like 23 wins not in. Indiana State robbed last year.
Yeah.
If a Drake doesn't win their tournament this year, they should be in. Yeah. George Mason and VCU should both be in. All these, you talk about, they've made a long run before, and that shows why you're wrong. Well, not really. St. Peter's has made a long run, and Oral Roberts has made a long run every single year now, especially as of late. You have a Cinderella make a run. And a lot of times those Cinderellas aren't even the teams who won the regular season conference tournament or a conference championship.
Yep. No,
I've always thought that you should have less to a point, I guess, because there is a balance to it. But
I think conference tournament should mean less.
I feel like the regular season should mean more as far as winning your conference.
Correct.
If you go undefeated in conference play and you have one bad game in a conference tournament, then you don't get in because of the conference you play in. That's bogus. So if you're gonna maybe make the conference tournaments an automatic bid for just the power conferences in basketball, and then make it the regular season championships for the others. Or something. That's an off-season topic of maybe changing seeding. How seeding works in the tournament.
But Jake, let's go ahead and try to get through these conferences real quickly. Big 12, you've got 8 teams currently sitting in the tournament, with Houston being a 1 seed. I believe Tech is a 2 seed. You got Arizona in there. I believe Iowa State was sitting at a 2 or 3 seed. BYU, Kansas, West Virginia, and Baylor kind of wrapping out those middle seeds throughout the bracket. Cincinnati, the only team that's kind of on the bubble. I'd be okay if Cincinnati making the tournament or not making the tournament isn't going to make or break my March Madness. I could care less if there's 9, 8 teams coming from the Big 12. I do think Houston, Tech, Arizona, Iowa State, all legitimate threats to make a decent run in the tournament this year.
Cincinnati should not be in the tournament. They're 17-12.
Yeah, they shouldn't be in.
And I don't think they really have any marquee wins. That's a team that would bother me if they're in the tournament. Yeah. Because who are they getting in over? Their best win on the season is Dayton.
You gonna get in over a New Mexico State or a New Mexico team or
Drake if they lose in their conference tournament?
Get in over even a
George Mason.
State. Boise State's not a bad team this year. I think they're a 20-win team.
Their best win on the season is Dayton.
Yeah, and Dayton's not very good this year. They're like
But
fourth
they're
in
in
the
it. But they're in a tough conference, so
That's all
it
that
doesn't.
matters.
Even though they lose to all the good teams in that tough conference,
Crazy.
it's just
Weird.
like Texas. Well, they're in a good conference. Well, even Texas has beat A&M, but
And
yeah,
Kentucky. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But
Kentucky.
yeah, I had to bring that up because as soon as you said Cincinnati, it's like, wait, they're on
They
top
are.
of the tournament.
Yeah.
I thought they weren't because I hadn't looked at bracketology in a minute. They should not be.
They should not be. And maybe after this weekend, they're not. But again, like I said, they haven't updated it since February 28th.
They'll be in because they beat TCU and Baylor and then lost to Houston.
The
Losing
Big
to
East,
Houston.
Jake, two teams that I think should be in over Cincinnati, a team I think that should be in over a North Carolina or an SMU or, some of these teams that we've mentioned that are on the bubble. But the Big East currently has 4 teams sitting in the tournament: St. John's, Marquette, Creighton, UConn, all those teams. 90 to 99% sure those 4 teams are in no matter what happens come tournament time. But Xavier and Nova need a good tournament to get in. I think that those 2 teams should probably be in over some of these other teams that are possibly on the bubble, on the outside looking in, or the inside looking out, whatever you want to call it. I like Xavier and Nova over a lot of those teams. But again, I'm kind of a Big East guy.
Yeah, especially Xavier. Nova's
They've played better at the end of the year, I think.
They beat Cincinnati.
Hey, there's a head-to-head.
They did beat Cincinnati. I mean, they've also lost to St. Joseph, lost to Virginia, lost to Maryland, who's good. Actually, a very close game
Maryland's
against
a good
Maryland.
Team. Maryland's a good team.
But they have beat St. John. They have beat Marquette. Those are 2 top tier wins. They beat UConn as well. They beat Fairleigh Dickinson. There's a lot of teams who can't do that. That's a good win. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a better case for Xavier and a Nova to be in, because also to me, you do when you're talking about these teams and you're comparing a Villanova and a Cincinnati, or Xavier and another low tier SEC team or a low tier Big 12 team, specifically SEC and Big 12 this year, because they're going to get the most in.
Yeah.
I think it does matter to me. It's like, okay, well, the Big East has great tournament success every year, and we're only going to put 3 or 4 teams of them in compared to putting 10 in the SEC. We're just rewarding the 9th and 10th team in the SEC just because they lose to all the top SEC teams. And I don't like that. To me, Xavier and Villanova are kind of fighting for their lives in the Big East and do have big wins.
They do. They absolutely do. And I would like to see them get in over teams on the bubble like an Ohio State and Indiana, or a Nebraska in the Big Ten, or Cincinnati, or whoever you want to throw out there who is currently sitting on the bubble. The Big Ten is also penciled in with 8 teams. Michigan State, they're going to be a 1 seed. Michigan, they're going to be a high seed. Maryland, a good Maryland team. Wisconsin coming on hot at the end of the year. Purdue, UCLA, Illinois, Oregon. Oregon is kind of one of those teams where you're kind of on the bottom. If you have a bad outing, if you lose in the first round and another team, maybe they get pushed out, even though they're not technically on the bubble. But teams on the bubble to kind of watch out for: Indiana, Ohio State, Nebraska. These are just teams to kind of keep an eye out on whenever you're watching conference tournaments. These are teams that if they make a deep run, maybe they push themselves into a spot. If they fall out short, maybe they find themselves in the last 4 out. But anyway, that's the Big Ten. I think Maryland's a good team. Excited about this Wisconsin team. You and I, we both like the podcast on your hat. And if Big Cat can get his heart broken one more time in the tournament, it's just good and fun. So I'm rooting for Wisconsin now to be as good as they possibly can, to have an utter meltdown come tournament time, just for my viewing pleasure come Monday mornings.
Yeah, it needs to be in like the second round.
Yeah.
The Sweet 16. Just
something
there's been a little bit too much happiness on that podcast for sports lately. And so I could use a little heartbreak. I'm a stick to it. Just like all the people who tuned into our Georgia podcast, the first one that blew up from Georgia fans, just raking in our tears, just taking it in. Oh, we accused everyone of being perverts, and we are a little bit ourselves as well.
Yeah. So we get it. And then the Mountain West, Jake, who was, I include the Mountain West this year in this conversation because last year's Mountain West conference was a very good Mountain West conference that made a run into the tournament and maybe fell a little bit short come tournament time. But only 2 teams, it looks like they're not, the committee who chooses this bracket is not going to fall for the same thing they did last year. New Mexico, Utah State are 2 teams that are in. San Diego State right there on the bubble. I think that's another team where you're kind of looking like a Xavier, looking like a Nova, who I would rather have be represented in the tournament than some of these lower tier teams. But San Diego State and Boise State on the bubble for the Mountain West. And then the SEC right now, the top dog of the college basketball ranks with 10 teams right now sitting in the March Madness tournament. Auburn, Bama, Florida, Tennessee. Those are all going to be top 2, top 3 seeds in the tournament. You're going to start looking at 4 and 5 seeds with Mizzou, A&M, Ole Miss, Kentucky, and then lower down to 7, 8, 9 seeds with Mississippi State and Vanderbilt. And then on the bubble watch, you've got Arkansas and Georgia. I don't want to see either Arkansas or Georgia make the tournament.
No, to me, Arkansas should be out officially after the blowout loss to South Carolina. If you can't beat them, you shouldn't
South Carolina,
be in.
one of the hottest teams in the country right now. Do they make a push?
That'd be the worst case scenario, them winning the SEC tournament.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a college football discussion, not a college basketball discussion. But
So I mean, I would really, with the SEC, I mean, I guess, you probably put Vandy. Yeah, I would just stop after Vandy.
Yeah, just stop after you were. The SEC's, to me, is settled. 10 teams, you're good. I think Vandy's a tournament team. If they make a run into the Sweet 16, cool. That's awesome. It's a cool little story. I think after that, you're just getting teams that don't deserve a spot to play.
You're getting teams who have a losing record in conference and have basically lost to everyone good they've played.
Yep.
Vandy has, I think, the wins to back up being in the tournament without a doubt. They've just won 3 ranked games in a row. Ole Miss, at A&M, home against Missouri. That's a really good run. They also have wins against Tennessee, Kentucky on the season as well. To me, that is, they beat Seton Hall's not very good. They did lose to Drake, by the way, just to further say that Drake should be in the tournament. But
right now, currently, Drake is atop their conference, and so they do have a spot in the tournament. Drake does,
right? But I'm just saying, they're one of those teams I could see losing in the first or second round of their tournament, just have a bad game, and then they don't get in the tournament.
Correct.
Which would be a travesty.
I
with the season that they've had. So I would stop after Vandy. I do think Vandy and up is deserving of being in the tournament. But then you go down to Georgia, Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, LSU, South Carolina. None of those teams. They should be in the NIT at best, if not the CBI.
Yeah, or just no postseason tournament.
Well, yeah, you turn down the CBI whenever you get that.
Yeah, you don't play in that if you're Texas. All right, Jake. Well, any last words on March Madness? For me, I'm just excited. I'm ready for conference tournaments to get going. Some conference tournaments already getting started. They're getting underway here pretty soon.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is our first episode in a while that's gone this long.
Yeah,
and I think that goes to show our excitement towards the tournament. I'm sure March Madness is going to be Texas football style podcast for us. We don't know our exact schedule yet. We will I do think I can just go ahead and say this, even though we haven't discussed it. Our schedule will be different to make sure that we are putting post game react. It's far into the evening as we realistically can of reactions to the day for at least the first weekend, if not the second as well. But, so we'll have some type of modified schedule.
That first weekend, Thursday through Sunday, the first 2 rounds of the tournament, Jake and I are planning and hoping that, because we will watch first game to last game, and that we will give you an episode of a live reaction each and every single one of those days. Those 4 days out of the week will be our schedule. And there'll be late nights, but we want you to have that content after each and every single day of the tournament, because it is just a blast. And it probably won't be a scripted show. It'll just be off the cuff, and we'll just go down each game what were the bets that we made, what do we think about the games real quick, because Jake and I, we watch every single one of these as much as we possibly can. And so yeah,
I'll have the quad box going on that big old TV behind me.
It's a holiday. March is one of my favorite times of the year just because of this tournament alone. So
and we've had some half court buzzer beaters already.
Maryland, Michigan State was awesome. Yeah, so we've
Tennessee, Alabama.
Yep.
There was another game. I can't remember who it was. I think it's Smart Schools that ended in a half court buzzer beater recently. And so, yeah, we're fully in March mode now. Now I'm just ready for Selection Sunday. Get my bracket, print it out. Still print out one to go with my bracket challenge.
We're old school guys. I like to print it out, paper, pen, fill it out.
We need to figure out a way to get our brackets on the screen. I know we can do that somehow.
Yeah.
We will be doing All in Texas brackets.
Yes.
Each, and maybe we'll do some type of bet on
it. Maybe we fill out a bracket each on here. On the show, and then we can have our personal ones, and
yeah. Maybe we have a little bet on it for the show.
I like personally. I'm a one bracket guy, so I might just do the one bracket on this show, and that'll be my bracket that I have for the year. So anyway, all right, Jake, that's gonna do it for our episode. Nearly an hour long, but hey, it's a fun one. Again, I told you all the March Madness freaks like Jake and I will love this episode. Going nearly a full hour talking college basketball. Not a better way to spend a Tuesday afternoon. So for Jake Jimerson, I'm Tanner Carlson. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. We follow Texas Longhorns sports year round, 365, and we will be here Tuesday through Saturday every day at noon, dropping these episodes for you. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, as always, hook 'em.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.